You're never paranoid enough about cybersecurity. My name is Tony Martinez. I'm 29 years old and I've been developing security protocols for defense contractors in San Diego, California for 4 years. When your team lead tells you that encryption standards are flexible guidelines, something has already gone wrong. I worked at Nexus Defense Solutions, a mid-sized firm specializing in network security for military installations. It wasn't the high-profile cybersecurity work you hear about in tech conferences. Just steady, methodical development. Building encryption protocols, testing authentication systems, making sure digital barriers around sensitive data actually held. My workspace was in a converted warehouse near the naval base. The building had no windows, and most days I never saw daylight until I stepped outside at 7 p.m. Sarah Chan had been my team lead for 18 months, early 30s, always carried the latest smartphone. She talked about agile development and client satisfaction metrics. She signed off on every security protocol that went into military networks. And until 3 weeks ago, I never questioned her decisions. While conducting a routine penetration test on a Marine Corps communication system, I discovered something that made my stomach drop. A deliberate weakness in the encryption algorithm. A mathematical flaw that would allow anyone with the right knowledge to decrypt supposedly secure military communications. I ran the vulnerability scan twice more. Same result. The digital signature on that flawed code belonged to Sarah. I saved the evidence and walked to her desk. She was debugging JavaScript on her second monitor, headphones on, nodding to whatever music she was playing. When she saw me approaching with printed code analysis, she pulled off her headphones. "What's keeping you up at night, Tony?" I placed the papers in front of her. "This encryption protocol has a built-in weakness." She scanned the code briefly, then shrugged. "Looks like standard implementation to me." "It's deliberately flawed. Anyone with basic cryptographic knowledge could break this encryption in hours." Sarah leaned back in her chair. "Sometimes the client has specific requirements we don't fully understand. Maybe they need easier access for their own purposes." "This isn't easier access. This is a security catastrophe waiting to happen." Her casual expression hardened. "Tony, you've been in this industry long enough to know that perfect security isn't always the goal. Sometimes compatibility and accessibility matter more than theoretical vulnerabilities." I stared at her. 4 years of late nights, security conferences, and careful attention to cryptographic standards, and she was telling me that deliberately weak encryption was acceptable. "I'm not comfortable shipping this," I said. "Then maybe you need to reconsider your priorities." I returned to my workstation and sat down. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. Throughout my career, I had believed that protecting military communications meant protecting the people who depended on those systems. Now I was learning that my own team lead was actively sabotaging that protection. I opened my development environment and quietly began documenting everything. I had been hired at Nexus Defense Solutions straight out of my master's program at UC San Diego. My thesis had focused on quantum-resistant encryption methods, and Sarah had personally interviewed me. "We need someone who understands next-generation threats," she had said during our meeting. "Someone who can build defenses that will last." For the first 3 years, I believed that's exactly what I was doing. I worked on secure communication protocols for Navy vessels, authentication systems for Air Force databases, and intrusion prevention tools for Army networks. The work was technically challenging and felt meaningful. I was building systems that kept people safe. My security clearance required annual reviews, financial audits, and regular polygraph examinations. I passed all of them easily because I had nothing to conceal. My colleagues respected my mathematical precision, and my code had never been compromised. Sarah regularly highlighted my work in team presentations. But over the past 8 months, I had begun noticing troubling patterns. Code reviews that skipped mathematical verification. Encryption implementations that used deprecated algorithms. Authentication systems with obvious bypass mechanisms. When I raised concerns, Sarah dismissed them as overthinking or explained them as legacy compatibility requirements. 4 months ago, I found similar weaknesses in Navy communication protocols. When I brought it to Sarah's attention, she said the client had specifically requested backwards compatibility with older systems. I documented my concerns in our project tracking system, but she assured me everything was properly authorized. 2 months ago, I discovered that our cryptographic keys for several Air Force projects were being generated with insufficient randomness. Sarah explained it as a performance optimization required by hardware limitations. But when I asked to see the technical specifications, she said those documents were restricted. Each time, her explanations seemed plausible enough to quiet my doubts. I trusted her expertise and her position. She was my mentor, the person who had taught me how to navigate the complex requirements of military contracts. When you work in cybersecurity, skepticism is essential. You learn to question every assumption, but you also learn to trust your leadership. Now, sitting at my desk with evidence of systematic sabotage, I realized my trust had been exploited. Sarah hadn't just been approving weak encryption. She had been systematically introducing vulnerabilities into critical military systems and using my reputation for mathematical rigor to legitimize her activities. I thought about my older brother, who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a communications specialist. He had always emphasized that secure communications could mean the difference between life and death for deployed personnel. I finished documenting the vulnerabilities and locked my workstation. Sarah's desk light was still on, and I could hear her on a conference call about project timelines. I had a decision to make, and I already knew what my brother would tell me to do. The right choice was rarely the comfortable one. I spent that evening in my apartment analyzing every vulnerability I had documented. Encryption protocols, authentication systems, code reviews, and implementation histories. The pattern was unmistakable. Over the past year, Sarah had introduced critical weaknesses into systems for the Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps. The vulnerabilities were sophisticated. They appeared to be compatibility features or performance optimizations, but they actually created systematic ways to bypass security measures. Someone with Sarah's level of access and mathematical knowledge could compromise military communications indefinitely without detection. I felt physically nauseated, not just because of the betrayal, but because of what it represented. Every security protocol I had helped develop had been deliberately weakened. Every night I had spent perfecting cryptographic implementations had been undermined by my own team lead. I had been working to protect military communications while unknowingly providing cover for someone actively compromising them. At 1 a.m., I made coffee and opened my laptop. I drafted an encrypted message to Commander Rebecca Torres, a senior cybersecurity officer at Naval Information Warfare Command whom I had worked with on several protocol assessments. The message included detailed documentation of the vulnerabilities, mathematical proofs showing how they could be exploited, and implementation histories linking them directly to Sarah. I used a secure communication protocol that Commander Torres had shown me during a training workshop. An encrypted channel with multi-factor authentication that only verified Navy personnel could access. The protocol generated a delivery confirmation proving the message was received by the correct recipient without being intercepted or modified. Before sending the message, I sat in my living room and considered the implications. Reporting Sarah would end my position at Nexus Defense Solutions. It would trigger a military investigation that would examine every project I had contributed to. It would destroy my relationships with colleagues who might see me as disloyal rather than principled. But the alternative was unacceptable. If I remained silent, those vulnerabilities would stay active. Military communications would continue to be compromised. National security would be undermined by someone I had trusted to protect it. I thought about my brother, the oath he had taken when he enlisted, the values he had tried to share with me. Integrity wasn't something you practiced when it was easy. It was something you practiced when everything urged you to compromise. At 1:33 a.m., I sent the message. The encrypted data disappeared into the secure channel, along with evidence that would either validate my concerns or end my career. I closed my laptop and tried to sleep, knowing I had crossed a threshold that couldn't be uncrossed. When I woke up the next morning, I had 5 missed calls from Sarah and a text message telling me to report to the office immediately. I showered, dressed, and drove to work, knowing it would likely be my final day at Nexus Defense Solutions. When I arrived at the office, Sarah was waiting by my workstation. Her usually neat appearance was disheveled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She intercepted me before I could sit down. Conference room. Right now. I followed her past the cubicles where my colleagues were starting their daily work. None of them looked up from their monitors. When Sarah entered the conference room, she closed the door and activated the white noise generator. "What did you do last night?" I kept my expression neutral. "I went home and worked on some algorithm analysis." "Don't lie to me, Tony. I got a call from Commander Torres at 5 a.m. She was asking very specific questions about encryption implementations and code review processes. Questions that suggested someone had given her detailed technical information. So Commander Torres had received my message and acted immediately. Maybe she's conducting a routine security assessment, I said. Sarah stepped closer. Stop pretending. I checked the access logs. You copied sensitive files before you left yesterday. She was monitoring my development activities. This confirmed my suspicions about the level of surveillance at Nexus Defense Solutions. It also suggested others at the company might be involved in whatever Sarah was orchestrating. If you're concerned about security procedures, we should probably involve management. Management isn't going to protect you, Sarah said. She opened her laptop and turned the screen toward me. I've been reviewing your work quality over the past year. Sloppy implementations, missed deadlines, failure to follow coding standards. It's all documented here. I hadn't missed a single deadline in 4 years. My code was consistently rated as the most secure on the team, and I always followed every coding standard precisely. That's completely false, I said. False enough to matter. She pointed to the screen, which showed a performance evaluation form with my name at the top and a series of negative assessments I had never seen before. Your security clearance renewal is coming up next month. These performance problems will definitely be included in the review. The threat was obvious. If I didn't withdraw my report, she would fabricate evidence to destroy my security clearance and end my career in defense contracting. Without clearance, I would be unemployable in cybersecurity. I understand what you're saying, I replied. Excellent. Now, I need you to send a message to Commander Torres explaining that you made an error in your analysis. Tell her the code you flagged is actually part of approved compatibility protocols. She was asking me to lie to a military officer about a national security issue. If I sent that message, I would become complicit in covering up the vulnerabilities. But if I refused, she would destroy my professional reputation and career prospects. I need some time to consider this. You have until 2 p.m. Send the retraction or pack up your desk. I returned to my workstation and sat down. My colleagues were absorbed in their coding tasks, unaware their team lead was using security clearances to cover up systematic sabotage. I wondered how many of them knew what Sarah was actually doing. I wondered if any of them would make the choice I was facing. At 1:45 p.m., I opened my secure messaging client and began typing. But instead of the retraction Sarah had demanded, I composed a second message to Commander Torres. This message included additional technical analysis I had completed overnight, including mathematical proofs showing exactly how the vulnerabilities could be exploited to decrypt military communications. I added an explanation that my team lead was pressuring me to send a false retraction. I also included screenshots of the fabricated performance evaluation she had shown me. I sent the message at 1:58 p.m. At 2 p.m., Sarah appeared at my workstation with a security guard and someone from Human Resources. Mr. Martinez, you are being terminated for insubordination and failure to comply with company procedures, the HR representative announced loudly enough for everyone in the workspace to hear. Please collect your personal items and surrender your badge and access credentials. The security guard supervised as I placed a few personal items in a cardboard box. My colleagues watched as I was escorted through the office to the parking lot. 4 years of dedicated work had culminated in a public dismissal. But as I drove away from Nexus Defense Solutions for the last time, I felt something unexpected. Peace. That afternoon I waited in my apartment for the consequences to unfold. I had destroyed my position at Nexus Defense Solutions and probably ruined my prospects in defense contracting, but I had also exposed serious security vulnerabilities that could have compromised military operations indefinitely. My phone rang at 3:30 p.m. The caller ID showed an unknown number. Mr. Martinez, this is Commander Torres from Naval Information Warfare Command. I received your communications. Can you meet with me this evening? We arranged to meet at a restaurant in downtown San Diego. Commander Torres was a woman in her 40s with short brown hair and intelligent eyes. She had brought a colleague who introduced himself as Agent Kim from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. I want you to know you're not facing any legal consequences, Commander Torres said before we began. The information you provided is exactly what we need to protect critical military systems. Agent Kim opened a tablet and showed me a series of network analysis reports. We've been investigating suspicious activity on military communication networks for the past 4 months. Your documentation helped us understand patterns we couldn't explain before. The reports showed communication intercepts from multiple military installations. Encrypted data was being successfully decrypted and analyzed, indicating that the encryption algorithms were compromised. How widespread is this? I asked. Based on your analysis, we believe Ms. Chen compromised at least 8 different military communication systems, Navy vessels, Air Force installations, and Marine Corps facilities. The operational security implications are severe. Agent Kim leaned forward. We need to understand everything about how Nexus Defense Solutions operates. Development processes, client relationships, personnel with access to classified systems. Can you help us map out the company's entire operation? I spent the next 4 hours explaining everything I knew about Nexus Defense Solutions operations, security procedures, client contracts, and personnel with access to sensitive information. I detailed how Sarah's position gave her authority to approve code implementations without independent verification, and how that authority had been systematically abused. Is anyone else at the company involved? Agent Kim asked. I'm not certain, I said honestly. Sarah was careful to compartmentalize information. Most of the development team probably doesn't understand what she was doing. Commander Torres made notes on her tablet. What first made you suspicious? The vulnerabilities were too mathematically precise to be accidental, I said. And when I questioned Sarah about them, she didn't deny what she was doing. She just tried to frame it as legitimate compatibility requirements. How long do you estimate this has been happening? Based on code timestamps, at least 12 months, possibly longer. Agent Kim closed his tablet. Mr. Martinez, we're going to need you to provide formal testimony for our investigation. Are you prepared to testify about your discoveries? I thought about Sarah's threat to destroy my security clearance, the fabricated performance evaluation, the humiliation of being fired in front of my colleagues. Yes, I said. Commander Torres handed me a secure phone. Don't discuss this investigation with anyone except the contacts programmed into this device. We'll be in touch within 48 hours. Driving home, I realized my career in cybersecurity wasn't ending. It was transitioning in a completely different direction. Instead of working for contractors who might compromise national security for unknown reasons, I would be working directly with the people responsible for protecting it. For the first time in months, I felt confident I was contributing to something genuinely important.